A warm welcome. A warm welcome to all of you. I'm really happy so many people are attending our roundtable to discuss the question of how to counter disinformation on the internet and in the media. And although the topic is not really new, I think the issue is more relevant than ever. For instance, when looking at the situation at the Polish-Belarusian border at the moment and the way Belarusian and Russian media are covering this catastrophe, we are obviously witnessing a particularly mean and even inhumane campaign of disinformation. So therefore, I'm very happy to introduce to you two outstanding experts on the topic who will share their views and their experience. Oksana Romaniuk is the executive director of the Institute of Mass Communication in Kiev, which is one of the most important institutions to observe the media landscape and the working conditions for journalists in Ukraine. Before that, she was correspondent for the Ukrainian news agency Unian for many years. So thank you very much for joining us today, Oksana.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our second guest is Jakub Kalensky. As a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Prague, his main task is to help raise awareness of the pro-Kremlin disinformation campaigns going on in the Czech Republic and all over Europe, actually. Before he worked for the EU's East Stratcom Task Force, where he was a team lead for countering. Hello.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me.
So this roundtable is part of a series of activities we are organizing in the framework of a project called Online Journalism in Depth that we conduct together with partners from Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, and Armenia. It's financed by the German Ministry for Economic Development. And if you're interested in learning more about the project, which would be great, of course, you can find detailed information on our website. So, the first part of the roundtable will be dedicated to the question of what exactly we are actually talking about when talking about disinformation. And my first question, Jakub, goes to you, because you have been following the phenomenon of disinformation for so many years now. How would you describe the current situation? What are the main tendencies you can see with regard maybe to the scope of disinformation, the target countries, the strategies behind it? How would you describe the situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we talk about the topics or the target countries, the target groups, it seems to me that the most precise description would be indiscriminate carpet bombing. The information aggressors are trying to hit as many targets as possible, as often as possible, through as many vectors as possible. That's why we don't see just one channel spreading disinformation, for example, Russia Today, in any given country, but we see dozens and hundreds and thousands of various channels spreading the same narratives and strengthening each other's messaging. The only evolution I would see in this regard is that the information aggressors are getting better at their job. They understand the audiences better, they know better which message works with which audience, which channels work for which audience. They gained a lot of experience in the last 7 or 8 years. And I think the disinformers still know our audiences significantly better than we know them. When it comes to the strategies of spreading disinformation, I see two things that kind of worry me and I think might be worrying in the next few years. Firstly, the disinformers are getting increasingly better at hiding their tracks. Often they will use seemingly domestic sources of information to spread disinformation that originated abroad. It is something that, for example, the Bundesnachrichtendienst and the Bundesamt for Verfassungsschutz warned against back in 2019. But it is possible to see this trend in other countries too. Secondly, the increasing coalition of disinformation spreaders on this planet, which is the regimes in the Kremlin and Chinese officials and their pseudo media increasingly operate on spreading disinformation. Chinese the COVID-related media space, that the US Army was actually the one that dragged the virus into China. Russians are by far the most experienced disinformers on the planet. And once their know-how gets joined by the Chinese limitless resources, I think we face very grim prospects.
So, Oksana, what is your experience? You already published several studies on how disinformation is spread or disseminated in Ukraine. I just came across one study from October 2020 when you realized that within only 3 days, Ukrainian media spread about 150 fake news. So this is quite an effort. And then, so what's behind that? How is that possible?
Yes, and unfortunately, we have observed a negative trend during this year. The number of fakes and manipulation has grown almost twice. And I'm afraid this trend is not only for Ukraine. I am afraid it is common for our region, post-Soviet countries. And I absolutely agree with Jakub that manipulators, disinformators, they are really better equipped than us, than academic society. And one of the reasons for that is that social networks through which disinformation is spread, they are really hostile to any researchers. We cannot really measure the impact of disinformation, and we cannot even track all kinds of disinformation. The data are closed. They are very difficult to see in complex and say nothing about combating. So I believe that the response should be quite different, like only just debunking. Debunking is very important, but we work now with...
Сейчас работаем с местными журналистами, потому что...
Again, here agree with Jakub that disinformation now targets really at local level, at personal level. The most terrible fakes, they are spread through these local groups, chats, and because they receive more trust in such a way if they are spread you see from this local media. And trends of this year, it is for sure the trend connected with vaccination. We registered really a huge growth of disinformation, connected with killing any trust to vaccines. And on the one hand, just without any aim, just do not believe vaccination. And on the other hand, try Russian vaccine, this Sputnik V, the best vaccine. Another trend was connected with international community. We see a lot of criticism connected with Afghanistan situation and refugees. There was a huge wave of disinformation. Another was connected with Belarus and this illegal attempts to illegally cross the border. There was also a lot of manipulations around this fact. And our normal, we call it normal, common disinformation connected with Ukrainian and Russian relations, that we see a lot of attempts to to negatively to undermine the trust to reforms, to system, to European way, we should go back to USSR, that our country is weak and it will not be possible for Ukraine to develop and to do the reforms. So this is what we have for the last 7 years, probably. Well, this is like that.
And what would you say, what is the main consequence of all these attempts of all these disinformation campaigns? Is it that people really trust the pro-Russian narrative more than the alternative ones, or is it, what is it actually?
I think this is the decrease of trust to different institutions, from church to police to even NGOs. This just kills trust in general, trust to nation. And people, they are like alone. We are alone in our bubbles, and they tend to look for some you know, in common world, it's not only about the truth, it's about the people who share this truth with you. So people are looking for societies, for these communities who share the common truth, and this truth may be not really truth, but in time when there is no trust, it is a way of like building your life in this modern society. So it's like a very difficult actually situation, and I think that we are still exploring it. It's not the end. We will see more developments in towards this not very good trend.
Mhm. Okay, then we should talk about maybe strategies, how to counter disinformation. And one of the most prominent strategies maybe is displayed or is incorporated, so to say, by the EU versus disinformation website, which is a product of the East Stratcom task force. Jakob, you were working there for 3 years at least. So actually you debunked an impressive amount of, I think, more than 13,000 get to know of all these disinformation pieces. How do you detect and track them down, and how do your colleagues work actually?
Yeah, it's necessary to say that I left the task force 3 years ago in 2018. So since my time at EU versus Disinfo, a lot of things have changed. Back then in 2015-16, we had no money and we were relying on volunteers. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, the team has its own budget and they are capable of actually paying local journalists who are, or researchers who are helping them with identifying new cases. But back then in those first years, it was really about reaching out to various initiatives in Europe, in Ukraine, obviously the pioneers of countering disinformation from Stop Fake or Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, or many other initiatives, and finding similar organizations in Europe, like the Prague-based European Values Center, and they were helping us with identifying the disinformation cases in countries, and then it went through multiple levels of approval and vetting. And I mean, obviously, it happens that sometimes the local researchers will send you something that later gets evaluated as something that should be involved in the disinformation review because the case is not as solid. So there was quite a lot of like vetting and clearance processes happening in Brussels.
So, but you don't use any kind of, there are specific software applications to track down all these things in the social media. I think, for instance, if people discuss quite certain topics, then you can really identify these forums, and then you can see what's on the agenda actually. You never use this kind of software. You really relied on the information from the countries themselves, yeah?
If I'm not mistaken, currently the team uses some tools, but I believe these tools are used mainly to get some idea about the traction of disinformation on social media, or basically in the world online. As far as I know, there is still no tool in the world that will help you to identify disinformation. The only tool is still the human brain. The machines are still capable of distinguishing satire and parody, or even the content that is actually debunking the disinformation, not repeating it, but debunking it. So if I'm saying there is still no machine that will help you identify disinformation, but there are tools that will help you to measure what is the approximate engagement on social media, for example.
Okay, but you already mentioned one of the biggest problem, and this is to really identify what is disinformation, just an opinion. We all have this problem that in a liberal society, actually, there's a broad range of possible opinions on anything and interpretations of certain things. So you really have to decide what is disinformation and what is still in the framework of what is tolerable. So how did you do that in Brussels, actually? How can you decide on where's the red line that mustn't be crossed?
There are definitely many ways how to interpret the facts, but it is important to stick to the facts in the first place. So as soon as somebody starts lying that there was no Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact carving up Europe in half, or that Russia hasn't invaded practically every European neighbor they have, and that the Russian territory keeps enlarging only thanks to defensive wars, or if who used the 13 flight, we are crossing this line of respecting the facts. So as the saying goes, you can have your own opinion, but you cannot have your own facts. And that kind of answers the question about who is defining the red line. It is actually nobody. It's not like a person. It is the objective facts that define the red lines. Objective factual reality that is independent on any particular human being. So in this regard, the journalist was actually simply trying to apply the journalistic standards that you have in your work as well. It doesn't really matter whether 5 are A and people are saying B. There's this person, somebody tells you that it's raining and somebody tells you that it's not. The job of the journalist isn't to say that we are not sure. The job of the journalist is to open the window and look out and find out. So we were just trying to go to the primary sources of information. We were trying to decide where do we have the facts to be able to say this is disinformation. And of course, there were many cases where we simply didn't have the facts. So we weren't kind of debunking that. We had to be sure that we are debunking only what deserves to be debunked.
I forgot to say at the beginning that you are invited to ask your questions as well, and you don't have to wait until the end of the our conversation until it's your turn, so to say. But you really may ask whenever you are. So if you have a question to Jakub or Oksana, so yeah, please ask your questions immediately. Otherwise, I would like to ask Oksana, you mentioned that you are following a different path. You are not trying to debunk every piece of disinformation, but you are rather trying to rebuild trust, especially on the local level with local journalists. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this. What are you doing there? Exactly?
We focus on 2 ways. First, we try to promote and support quality. We launched, we like this initiative, Journalism Trust Initiative. I think that you probably heard about that, and we took it as a basis for a kind of whitelisting campaign, where we measure media by around 18 criteria, from transparency of media ownership to quality of contents, hidden advertising, different aspects. And we then, once every half year, we publicize a white list, which normally includes around 8 or 9 media. And this media, we say that here are the media that meet the criteria, you can trust them. And we always receive a big response. We receive letters from those media who were not included, and they ask why, and we give them detailed explanation and see here traces of hate speech, and here you have problems with gender balance, and here you have something else, and you have to be more transparent. And those who are included into the whitelist, they are very proud. They make news about it. They go to advertisers and they can use it for for involving financial support for talks with socially responsible business who may be interested in support of quality media. The second way is connected also with debunking. We launched a campaign in regions with local media. We produce weekly digests. We look at contents of local media. We have initiative groups in regions, and they give assessment of disinformation, fake news in local media, but they try not to be very negative. I mean, they try to support those media who noticed mistakes and they correct and something like that. And I can tell you the figures, like during only 2 months of the project, we found around 2,000 fakes in 8 regions of Ukraine. Yes, 1/3 of them was clearly of pro-Russian origin, Russian propaganda. 1/3 we can say it was local populism, local politicians, and like problems with local governments. And another part was problem with professionalism. It was a surprise for me, but it appeared that journalists have problems with reading figures and understanding how to report these percents, figures, ask questions. And for local journalists, it is essential, and it gives like grounds for manipulations of politicians. So I think that we need to talk about transparency and trust with media as the strategic way of their development, not to compete with social platforms for emotions. Let social platforms be social platforms. They were created like for these emotions, but professional media should focus on trust, quality, providing information, explanations. And also about it is an essential component of media literacy when we say that here are the media that you can trust, and here is the methodology. You can look yourself and decide what media should be trusted. During the last year, we have some positive developments in Ukrainian media sphere connected namely with transparency. 2 big online media developed editorial policies. For us, like not a lot of media have editorial policies, but it is very important. And the growth, we register growth of transparency, specifically among online media. Around 50% of online media, they are transparent. 50. 2 years ago, we had only 30% of online media who were transparent about their media ownership. So slowly, but the progress is here. But I think we should raise the issue of trust, not only debunking, but also this responsibility and communication with the audience. I forgot that. I think that journalists should build better understanding of their target audience and communicate with them. Like we had positive examples in regions when people had a lot of questions about vaccination, about COVID, and journalists involved experts and public could ask questions about these problems with vaccination and receive answers directly. And journalists were like a bridge between this expertise and the public. Maybe it is another way where we can develop.
Yeah. I think we have already developed some projects based exactly on this mechanism of this personal meeting the audience. There's one question in the chat. I will just read it to you. Do you mainly focus on state propaganda or also on fake news coming from the private sector? Actually, for example, industries, fossil industries publishing fake studies in order to greenwash.
I can tell that we focus on all types of manipulations and propaganda, including commercial companies. We have oligarch Akhmetov, which is today our top client of hidden advertising in online media. He invests really a lot into positive manipulations about his companies and into promoting like associated with him politicians. We have a big like spectrum.
Okay, thank you. And the EU Stratcom is focusing on state disinformation, isn't it?
Yeah, the Stratcom was established following the Council conclusions in 2015, where the heads of states and governments tasked the EU to do something specifically on Russian disinformation campaign. And so far, there hasn't been a conclusion saying that you should focus on Chinese or Iranian or any other disinformation campaign.
Yeah, there's one question in Russian in the chat. Unfortunately, I'm not able to read it, so maybe either one of the interpreters or Boris, you could read it.
It's probably to me. It's about the names of the sites
okay.
that were mentioned. Okay. Yeah. Their names were Liga and NV. Yeah. And both have very good editorial policies, and I know that Liga, they even applied to global JTI, Journalism Trust Initiative, to be included into this into their list.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so actually you already said that you don't believe that debunking is the best or the only way how to deal with disinformation. And another fact is that you can never catch up with disinformation because they are always there before you are, and you can always react and you never get that much attention. So should the conclusion be that we don't need to debunk all these pieces of disinformation anyway, because it's not worth the time and the effort, because we will not reach out to the same target group again? Jakub, what do you think?
I'm actually not really sure that it's true that we are never able to catch up. There is actually quite a lot of research that shows that when debunking is done properly, it can reach the goal. Which is not to say that there are many other strategies that we should be doing, and I will be happy to elaborate like what more can be done. But just to stick to the effectiveness of debunking, I'm sure most of you in Germany recall the German Lisa case in 2016, where the Russian media fueled the story that a little girl was allegedly raped by migrants, and German state is trying to hide this matter under the carpet. There was a similar Lisa case in Lithuania a year later. Not many people know about it, and they don't know about it precisely because it was a perfect success of the Lithuanian authorities, who managed to kill the story before it even managed to spread. And this is like, in order to do that, you need to track the disinformation as quickly as possible, to deconstruct it, debunk it, and then to spread the debunk among as many channels as possible, so that the first story in the media is not a little girl was allegedly raped and then we have to catch up, but the first story in the media is there was another information attack, again from Russia. So I think it is possible to reach the goal purely with debunking, but it is definitely useful to know that there are certain target groups that we will never reach. People who decided that they want to trust those fishy sources or pseudo authorities telling them, that vaccination doesn't work. I hope that this group of people isn't bigger than 10 to 15%, but still, we have to know it's
мы должны достигать к этим людям, то есть через контент, который базируется на фактах. Другие стратегии нужно принимать, то есть найти спикера, которому они доверяют, тот, кто работает в теория, то есть
football players, I don't know. It only means that you have to find some different channels and different ways to reach this group.
There's another question in the chat. Oh, it's a long question. So somebody heard that the thesis in Ukraine, that's why the pro-Ukrainian media should tell people who are subject to disinformation about Ukraine in this way, in a propaganda way. So the media can bring Ukraine back into the information discourse in the occupied territories and counteract disinformation. So what do you think about this positive propaganda as a means against disinformation, pro-Kremlin disinformation?
I do not think that if we're positive to something negative, that we will be trusted. I think the response should be the true information. If everything is rosy and beautiful, it will kill the trust because nobody will believe it. And everyone knows that, yes, we have problems in Ukraine, we have corruption, we have other problems, we are doing these reforms and everything is not very easy. So I think we just have to tell the truth and how to counteract information in the occupied territories. The problem is that residents of occupied territories, they receive very weak Ukrainian signal, from broadcasting, and they mostly get information either from Russian media, like Russia 1, which is very terrible source of Kremlin propaganda, or they read local so-called media. I say so-called because this is just communist times way of information. We tried to analyze it, and there is what you call this positive propaganda. Half of it is very positive information about success of local self-proclaimed authorities, and half is a very critical information about European countries, about international organizations like United Nations, OSCE, other European Union, about United States, and about Ukraine. A lot of fakes of the level of the year 2014, when they said that Ukrainians got kidneys of people to sell them to European Union. So they still continue with it in the occupied territories. Non-government controlled territories need really informational the occupation, how to say, because people are deprived of their right to receive information and to make conscious decisions. They live in fear, and they are fed with this disinformation. This is a very big problem, and which has to be solved. I do not see an easy solution to this problem, and certainly positive propaganda will not help. Will help. What could help is probably some safety guarantees to journalists who could travel there and report the revival of local media, and yeah, it's very, very complicated situation.
Speaking of propaganda, Jakub, I assume that very often the EU is also confronted with this accusation of spreading actually propaganda, because one of your tasks was also to communicate the EU's activities towards Eastern Europe. So actually, I guess many people say, well, this is EU propaganda. It's not any better than the pro-Kremlin propaganda.
Yeah, that's why we're trying to stick to the facts, which is precisely something that the Kremlin's propaganda isn't doing. So yeah, it is crucial to really remain truthful in the communication. And yes, the part of the package of like countering disinformation as a whole was not only the EU versus disinfo product, but also this what we called positive communication, explaining what the EU is about in the target countries. In our case, it was the countries on the Russian front line, the so-called Eastern Partnership countries, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and the three republics in the Caucasus. And the thinking behind this was that if we manage to explain that the EU money is there for building schools and building roads, the people there will stop believing the hateful disinformation that Oksana was just describing. And sometimes it's really, sometimes you are incapable of understanding why are they even doing it, you know, accusing Europeans that they spread homosexuality and pedophilia in those countries. They are really trying to incite hate. And I think it is possible to have a positive communication campaign saying Europe is doing this, this, and this without lying. If someone wants to call that propaganda, it is probably possible. We weren't really using the term propaganda to describe what the Russians are doing neither. It is a loaded word, and it's not really sure that everybody has the same definition. We were really trying to stick to the term disinformation, and disinformation is defined as false information that is being spread intentionally. So we always stuck to the fact that the Kremlin might be doing disinformation, but we are not.
Okay, then there's another question in the chat. Part of disinformation strategy is to hide the role of the state, to deny it, so to say. Yeah, so they blame a few gifted young men and we can't control them. How do you deal with this strategy? This obviously refers to the annexation of the Crimea, where Russia was denying to have anything to do with it at the beginning, at least. So how could we deal with this?
We are actually afraid that this strategy may be used again. How do we deal with this strategy? The coordination within the government bodies to quickly respond to disinformation and to quickly produce information is very essential. Some 5, 6, 7 years ago, we saw problems when something happened and the response from the government came after like 24 hours. It is not normal. The response should be quick, coordinated, and this is what we understood is very, very essential. Second is the access of foreign journalists and correspondents. For us, it was really very important when in 2014, 15, and 16, we are really very grateful to those foreign journalists and correspondents who risked their lives and arrived in Ukraine to report the situation, how it is in reality. And it really helped us, even inside the country, to better understand, and it helped, I think, the international community as well to understand the situation. So I think, well, I would be happy if more foreign media opened their offices here and could report information. Again, we come to that professional journalism is really still very important. Yes, social networks, they like shape our vision, but the basis of it still is the information from professional media. They feed this discourse, while social media may like shape. And there are a lot of other issues, but these two, I think, are very, very important.
Mm-hmm. So you said that maybe professionalism is not always at a high level in Ukrainian, at least the local newspapers or the local media. So actually, maybe you can tell a few things about the way professional education.
Unfortunately, what I see, and I think that the colleagues would agree here, that they try to copy the behavior of bloggers in social media and to involve emotions in their text. And I think it is a short-term strategy because you can turn a lot of attention of your audience when you give very bright headline, but in strategic from strategic point of view, it will like kill the trust of the audience, and the audience will leave. The problem with emotions, this is what we see. The problem with transparency, not all are ready for transparency. Our market is really very big for media. We have over maybe 15 in my opinion, because they cannot compete. And they cannot compete for information, and corporations like Google, Facebook, and others, they really took a bigger part of advertising market already. So local media appear in the situation when they are more and more dependent on local politicians, hidden advertising, and it will kill them, I think. They should think more strategically. We have different programs of trainings for local media in Ukraine. We have grant programs for local media. Some involve even donations from local businesses and trying to build this transparency and trust. Very interesting examples. Well, anyway, I think that the coronavirus has showed us how people choose what media to support and what types of media can survive in future. And despite of this huge amount of program, local media should be sustainable. They really had trust of local online media. This is an important remark, because printed media were almost killed by coronavirus. Even big media, they had to close. Online media had really good standing. Even national online media, local online media, they developed better than other types of media.
Mm-hmm. So to me, it seems that many media are a little bit stuck in kind of a trap, because on the one hand, you say they should not evoke emotions, they should not play with emotions, but on the other hand, they need a strong connection to their communities in order to survive. So actually, the whole problem of monetization and so on is directly linked to this community, and so it's a difficult situation. So, but I would like to ask the two of you, what role actually do public broadcasts play in this? Because hopefully they should be a little bit less dependent on advertising and on private money, but they could, in an ideal case, they could survive by public spending, and so they could play another role, a better role maybe in fighting disinformation. Yeah. How do you perceive the situation concerning public broadcasters in these most affected countries?
I do believe that public broadcasters are crucial in this battle for objective reality, precisely for the reason that you mentioned, that they do not need to be oriented on making money, and they can adhere to the highest journalistic standards, just to seek the factual reality independent on someone's statements, as discussed earlier. I actually think that the media in general, not only public broadcasters, but media in general, could also help with the problem that Mr. Table mentioned in his question, because it was not only with regards to Crimea in 2014. We are seeing exactly the same thing currently on the Polish-Belarusian border, where the state keeps denying that we have anything to do with it, and unfortunately, there were Western journalists reporting precisely this. You know, there are some migrants appearing on the border. Nobody knows where they appeared, but there is a problem that the Poles do not want to take them. I'm sorry, this is just bad journalism. Somebody brought those refugees there with a very clear purpose. And everybody in the eastern half of Europe, maybe in the whole Europe, knows that. So if we have an American TV that is incapable of reporting that, that's just bad journalism, and we should be calling this out. On the other hand, I think it's also crucial to understand, even if you are a public broadcaster and have the luxury of not being dependent on the money from the advertisement, that they will not solve the whole problem, and they shouldn't have the ambition. There are people who will never trust them for various reasons, sometimes just because they are broadcasting from the country's capital, and us people in the countryside, we know so well that the capitals are full of liars, and there is no difference between the politicians and the media, mainstream media. And I think the public broadcasters should simply accept that they will never persuade these people and just resign on that. I know it sounds harsh, but trying to persuade people who do not want to be persuaded, that just kind of weakens your goal, which is to deliver a precise message. It is, in my opinion, it is not really wise to spend resources on trying to persuade those who do not want to be persuaded.
Well, our public broadcaster is only 5 years old, but we are very happy that we have it, because previously it was a very vertical structure with censorship. It was a state television which reported just disinformation. So now we have a source of independent news at the national level on TV, while all the other national TV channels are oligarchic and belong to oligarchs, and they promote their views. So for us, public broadcaster is very important to survive, to develop, and probably to change the landscape of media in Ukraine. And one interesting thing is that, yes, television is not very popular in Ukraine. I mean, public service, public broadcasting company, TV channel. But their online platform is really developing very good. They developed during the last year. I think one of the reasons for that is that we, because of quarantine, we have to stay online. A lot of us have to work from home, and we check this news, and we are looking for reliable sources of information. On the one hand, we have growth of audience among online media. On the other hand, unfortunately, we have growth of these bubbles in social networks. And so both positive and negative effects are here.
Sophie Janusz has a question.
Yeah, hello. I'm Sophie Janusz. I'm the coordinator of the Forum Media and Development, of which n-ost is also a member and working for Cameco. I would like to go back to one of the first remarks from Jakob. When you talk about and deepen their cooperation to produce all the fake news. Which impact do they really have? I mean, it all costs a hell of money. What do you know? Maybe also Oksana from Ukraine. What do you know about the impact then? What changes it really?
It is one of the biggest problems. That it is not exactly simple to measure the impact for I think there are some, they are people believe that, and that would be the number that Russians managed to persuade. It doesn't really matter whether you received from a Russian official, whether you received it from Russian state TV, or whether you received it from a local extremist politician who has certain lines to take. Everything is the effect of Russian state propaganda. However, we do not have this tool in those cases where the Russians are not creating disinformation from nothing, but when they are only playing into already existing disinformation narratives. We saw that perfectly during the 2016 disinformation attacks on the US elections. The Russian trolls were heavily using the dividing lines between various minorities. They were heavily amplifying the racial questions, amplifying the Black Lives Matter movement, but also amplifying the white supremacists. And this is already existing. This existed before the Russians came. On the other hand, they provided with significantly bigger impact, but it is impossible to divide what is their impact and what would be there without that. So it is even hard for me to say, like, how do we, whether we know what big an impact their disinformation has. But when you have a look at those few opinion polls that are measuring how many people believe those disinformation messages that wouldn't be in the space if it wasn't for Russians. I believe it was the Ukrainian company Detector Media that measured that around 1/3 of Ukrainians believe that Maidan was an illegal coup d'etat. This is a line of Russian propaganda. This wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the Russian state channels. And we are talking about Ukraine. Ukraine is probably, they have the highest alert on Russian propaganda in Europe. So even in such a country, you have 1/3 of people being persuaded about this. Unfortunately, we don't have many of these numbers in many European countries, but the various numbers I have seen were showing that anything between 10% and 50% of population can be affected by various disinformation campaigns. It seems to me that it is troubling, even if it's just 20%. When we talk about, the US elections in 2016 or the Brexit referendum in the same year, these elections were decided by just a few thousand people. If you are capable of influencing like 5% or 10% or 20% of people, then you are basically deciding the election outcome. So in my opinion, it is troubling even if the actual impact is below 20%, because it can still change our election results.
I absolutely agree with Jakob here. Perfect remarks. I only add that look at the level of vaccination in Ukraine. We have around 35% of population only vaccinated now against coronavirus. And this is one of the direct effects of Russian propaganda, which is trying to undermine all vaccines. They're spreading a lot of disinformation at local level, whatever, that these vaccines, they come from foreign countries, they're very dangerous, they want to turn you into slaves, etc., etc. So this is like clear effect of it.
Sophie, yeah.
Thanks. Just to that, Oksana, I'm not convinced. You know why? Because the vaccination rates are also very low in countries where we do not have this Russian influence into the anti-vaccine campaigns. The last time I, for example, read the figures in Slovakia, they were also shockingly low, the vaccination rate, and they are part of the EU, and you know they have all this freedom, and of course there are also people campaigning against it, but so I'm wondering whether this is really just that.
Ukraine had the lowest rate in Europe.
Yeah, but anyway, there will be other sources of disinformation, spreading distrust into vaccines and vaccination as such. I mean, in Germany, we also have these large parts of the population that who are convinced that everything is it's a conspiracy and that COVID actually doesn't exist. So with having a look at the time, I would like to ask a last question maybe. Many observers say that actually the main goal of all these disinformation campaigns is not to convey a specific disinformation, but rather to confuse people totally, to flood the internet with such a lot of contradictory information that in the end people cannot decide any longer whom to believe and what's true and what not, what's false information. So that actually in the end people lose their interest in politics as such and are no longer willing to participate in any kind of debate. So do you think this is something we can observe already? Is this a appropriate description? Oksana, you not?
Yeah, I agree here that because what we observe is that disinformation also targets any attempts to unite, build reforms, develop system in Ukraine, build strong institutions, and disinformation targets people's beliefs. Like it is formed to involve not logical thinking, but more your emotions, your heart, your stomach, not your brain. And the result of it would be that if people are not united around some goals, they are not seeing any solutions to questions. They live in fear, in hate. These people are very easy to manipulate. So I absolutely agree here that one of the goals of disinformation is not only to give this different fact, but also to give this feeling of fear and hate. This is what we see actually in the non-government controlled areas when they try to involve these emotions. Yeah.
So what could we actually do about this? I mean, it's of course media are not responsible for building a society again, but what we can see is that things like customization of services and everything is getting more and more individual, and you can really live in your own bubble all the time. So what could the media do in order to overcome this situation in which it's very easy for disinformation campaigns to be successful?
May I add here that I think that we should not only focus on media here. Yes, media should think about transparency, quality journalism, strategic thinking, partnership with audience, socially responsible business, and so. But I would like to see some international effort aimed at social networks and that social networks should make public this. They should not hide these algorithms. We cannot really trace the disinformation patterns now, and we cannot really understand these policies, how they rule how they choose contents, how they form these bubbles. This is already influencing our societies. This is not the private company sphere. I mean, we used to live in the society in times when internet was a common good. It was a common free good. But now we live in times when this something which used to be common is now ruled by private corporations. And for instance, I am being a Ukrainian, I am not able even to apply to court to defend my rights if they are violated by a corporation which is registered somewhere in the United States. And this is already a threat to democracy, I think. We should raise this issue and we would be happy to participate with our expertise if there is any like international effort to raise this issue. But and the responsibility of media, yes, this is really very high, and all of us, for all of us, it is very important to support independent media and quality media and help them how we can. We can provide like bulletproof vests. Please arrive in Ukraine. We can help with your safety. We can train journalists. We can make these lists and ratings. Maybe this list can help quality media involve advertisers. So do what you can to support professional media. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, this would be a very good closing remark, but I would like to ask Jakub a last question as well, because you are close to the EU, at least in our perception now. Do you think the EU is engaged enough in order to support these independent media and to really maybe curb the influence of these international corporations?
The EU is really in a unique role when it comes to the pressure on social media platforms. And so there are currently two big law initiatives going on in Brussels, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Media Act. And I will not pretend that I'm a huge expert on these initiatives, because it's quite a complicated matter, but I believe they are trying at least to press on the social media companies to be more active when it comes to countering these hostile information operations. I do think that the EU could be doing more when it comes to the support of independent media and the researchers, think tankers who are trying to counter disinformation. I am not really sure that the EU has done their homework here. When you talk to partners from other countries who are working on these matters, like tracking of disinformation, countering it, or media literacy programs, far too many of the NGOs are actually funded by the US or the United Kingdom. I don't hear very often that someone could rely on European funding, and I think this is a very big weakness. So I think the EU could definitely be doing much more here. But I want to hope that they are doing quite a lot when it comes to the social media platforms and what they could be doing.
Okay, it's good to hear that this is not only our perception as an NGO, that the EU is not so easy a partner in supporting media and media independence in Eastern Europe. But this may be a topic for the next webinar. Thank you very much for joining. It was really interesting. I'm really happy you asked some questions and we were happy to answer them, I think. I hope you learned a lot, at least I did. And yeah, see you next time. There will be many more webinars and interesting activities in the framework of this project. So please join us again, and yeah, have a nice evening today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Wiedersehen.